Hey everyone, my name is Nate. Thank you for joining me for this first episode of a 40k journey. We're going to be painting some Horus Heresy Mark 6 Space Marines in Dark Angel's Legion colors. So these are just the paints I used. You don't have to use these exact paints. If you prefer using like Vallejo or AK or Tamiya, Army Painter, whatever, this is just what I had on hand, and this is just what I used. You do not need to use these, and actually, you can paint these Marines with a lot fewer colors than I did if you're, more comfortable mixing paints than I am. But I started out with just a base, a primer of flat black. I was just using a can of Rust-Oleum, flat black primer I got at the hardware store, but that ran out partway through. So I had to finish priming with Vallejo Surface Primer Black. And then once that was done, I painted over with Abaddon Black, just because it gives a little bit more depth and it makes things look not quite so flat. But again, you do not have to use these exact colors. This is just what I had. So what I'm starting with, now that I've got the black down, is filling in the silver parts with Leadbelcher. This is like a medium silver color. So gunmetal would be a close match, or some kind of steel. So again, whatever you have will work. My only suggestion would be to don't do what I did when I first started painting 40k models, and that is to use craft paints. Don't get me wrong, if you can make craft paints work on miniatures, then you're a better painter than I was. But I think that kind of hindered me a little bit at the beginning of my painting journey when I was starting out when I was 15, just because craft paints are great for painting things like birdhouses, but the pigments can be kind of thick and chalky, and making them work when you're painting miniatures can be really difficult. And it can take up so much time that you may as well have just saved another couple of bucks and just sprung for a model paint to begin with. But what I'm doing here is I'm painting Leadbelcher, that gunmetal color, over the metallic parts on my Space Marines bolt gun. Got the magazine and the chainsaw bayonet here doing the barrel, and the rest of the mechanical parts. And don't worry if you kind of paint outside the lines a little bit, because the Space Marines' main armor color is black. Mistakes are real easy to cover up. It's a very forgiving paint scheme. It's not too complex. You don't need to separate colors, when drawing like crenellations or anything like that. It's a real good scheme for beginning, and it's kind of fitting that this is a new beginning. This is my first video in the 40k Journey series, and when I started 40k back in 2nd edition, I believe in 1998, however old my my niece is, because I was painting my first 40k models the night she was born. Um, when I first started with the 2nd edition box set, I painted the Space Marines in Dark Angel's chapter colors, and now these are my first Horus Heresy models, and going back to Dark Angels. It's a different color scheme because this is Dark Angel's Legion and not Dark Angel's Chapter. The Dark Angel's Legion had a primary black color. The Chapter is primarily a dark gray. But in any case, I'm still, starting over a little bit, and I'm really grateful you're joining me for this new beginning. I moved on a little bit, and I am painting the handle on my Space Marines pistol here. I gave all of my Mark 6 Marines sidearms. I just thought that was, smart way to go. But you can assemble your Marines however you like. They're your Marines. Don't worry about being non-canon, unless you're going to be participating in a tournament or something. Me, no tournaments. No tournaments. I probably won't even play with these guys. I just enjoy the hobby. I just enjoy painting and building models. So now we've moved on a little bit. We're adding a little bit of Leadbelcher to the Marines' backpack cables. And now we're doing the studs on his left shoulder pad. So these can be a little tricky. So again, don't feel bad if you paint outside the lines. Mistakes are really easy to color up here. That, and depending on how grim darky you want your Marines to be, adding in some chipping using a darker metallic color like Leadbelcher might be exactly what the doctor ordered. So, nothing is permanent on a model unless you want it to be. So, don't feel like you have to get it perfect the first time. I didn't. I don't know hardly anyone who gets it perfect right off the bat. So, don't be shy about turning the model around in your hands to get a better angle. Move the model around your brush. Don't try to move the brush around your model. And that's part of the reason why I like having some sort of a model holder. I have the Citadel small model, I don't know, base gripper holder, whatever you want to call it. I find it's really helpful just because, I'm starting to get up there in years a little bit, and that kind of bell-shaped base to it I find is really easy on my hands. My hands cramp kind of easy. So don't feel, bad about like resting your hand on the edge of a surface or something if you need to, as I'm doing here. There we go. Yeah, move move your hands up a little further, me. All right, so finished with the Leadbelcher parts. We're going to move on here, and I'm going to be using Vallejo Model Colors Cavalry Brown. I know it seems like a little bit of a misnomer to me because it looks a lot more kind of reddish than brown, but that's just me. So I'm using that to paint the extra magazine pouches on my Marine's belt here, and I'll also be using that for his pistol holster. I think it makes a nice leather color without being a little too on the nose with like, a leather brown. And it's a little variety, and Dark Angels almost have kind of Christmas colors. Dark Angels Chapter has the dark green, and a lot of their accent pieces are in red, which can be a little bright, a little overwhelming, depending on how much of it you have and where you have it. But having something that's kind of red, but not like super duper bright red, that can be a nice contrast. And it can be, a nice contrast without standing out too much. And again, depending on how grim darky you want your Marines to be, it may be advantageous to have colors that are a little bit more subdued. Maybe indicate that these guys have been in the field for quite a while, sadly, fighting their brother Space Marines. So, you may see me dabbing from that tray on the right there. That is a homemade wet palette. If you have not used a wet palette before, I strongly recommend trying it. Wet palettes are something I wish someone had been able to tell me about when I started. But unfortunately, I started, years before YouTube existed, and, there weren't a lot of online painting tutorials that I knew of online. So if you wanted to learn more about painting models, you had to find some kind of a book or like a hobby magazine like Fine Scale Modeler or White Dwarf, or you had to go down to your local game store and talk to someone who already knew what they were doing. I'm not a classically trained artist. I am not a pro model painter. I'm just someone who loves 40K and has been, well, kind of stumbling around in the dark for quite a long time. So that's part of why this is a 40K journey, is a lot of the techniques we're going to be using and that you've probably already read about or seen tutorials on are relatively new to me. So if they're new to you too, don't panic. We're going to learn together. So, and as you can see, I already missed a little bit of Leadbelcher on the bolt gun doing the loading mechanism. So what I'm going to do now is use some Administratum Grey to fill in the joints in the armor. It's not a huge deal, And, you can probably get away with leaving them just black if you wanted. But I find it really helps to add a nice contrast and break up that outline a little bit if you paint them. So what I'm doing is filling them in with Administratum Grey. It's a light gray. It's not super bright, but it's a nice kind of light gray. And then just fill those in solid. Don't worry if there's still lines showing or if there aren't lines showing between the armor plates. That's perfectly fine either way. We're going to be filling that in later with a Nuln Oil shade over the entire model, and that's going to fill in the gaps between the segments of the joints here, and that's going to give us that lovely color in between. So, and again, don't worry, like this step especially, don't worry if you paint outside the lines, because we're eventually going to be edge highlighting the armor with Mechanicus Standard Gray, which is like a medium dark-ish gray, and Administratum Grey. So if you, again, color outside those lines, you may actually do yourself a little bit of a favor. So, but yeah, the goal with all of this for me is to enjoy myself. I'm not going to win any Golden Demon painting tournaments anytime soon, or probably any painting tournaments, but 40K and modeling and model painting has been such a part of my life for such a long time that I really just want to enjoy myself. Just want to sit down and paint for a while, put on some music, and just relax, kind of zone out a little bit. So now that we've filled in the gaps in the armor plating, I'm taking some Caliban Green here, and I'm doing these cables on the sides of the armor here. There's one on the, kind of ankle joint on the left leg, and there's another one on the inside of a knee joint there. Why exactly these cables are on the outside of the armor is frankly a little baffling. Seems like kind of a vulnerable target that you would want to have like under the armor plating, but I don't know. So, and all we need is just a little bit of Caliban Green on those. We don't need a lot. Now we're taking a little Mephiston Red, and we're going to paint in his eyes, his lenses. And there's also a couple little lenses, maybe targeting scopes on the top of his helmet that we're going to fill into. We just need a little teeny tiny dot there. Don't need much. And same thing for his eyes. Not a whole lot. We just need to fill it in there. That's all we need to do. Don't need to spend too much time on it. And again, if you go outside, which is really easy to do, his lenses are pretty small. All we need is a little bit of your main black color there to cover it up. For me, that's Abaddon Black, but if you have some other kind of black, then go ahead and use that. And I got sidetracked. My DIY wet palette. Definitely give one of those a try if you haven't. I used my DIY one just because I wasn't sure I would like it, and I wanted to give it a try before going out and spending like $30 on it, something. So I'm going to do, now that we've got all the base colors, switching gears real quick, now we're going to just wash the entire model with Nuln Oil. You don't really need to thin it down unless you really want to, and Nuln Oil's, at a pretty good consistency to begin with, but just wash the whole thing. A wet palette helps keep your paint usable a lot longer than if you just put it on a dry palette. And it helps to kind of pre-thin your paint a little bit, so it's not nearly as thick as if you were globbing it on right out of the pot. And I made this particular wet palette just with a tray. I got some Inari Zushi in from Wajimaya, a paper towel that you fold to roughly the size of the tray, and a piece of parchment paper. So you just take your tray, put the paper towel in, add water until the towel is saturated. You don't need to fill the whole tray. Matter of fact, don't fill the whole tray. And then cut a piece of parchment paper to the same size as your folded paper towel. Lay it on, and there you go. So it's a great way to test the waters and to see how you like working with a wet palette. I didn't use one for a lot of years, and in retrospect, I wish I had. I wish I had. It would have made things easier for me, especially when I was first starting out. But if you don't have one, it's not the end of the world. I painted plenty of models to an okay standard for over a lot of years without using a wet palette, so it can be done. You may also notice off to the very right there that gray thing. That's a Citadel Water Pot, and I was reluctant at first. I was hesitant. I was like, why would you want to buy just a water pot when you could just use like a cup that your Starbucks coffee, your coffee came in that morning? And don't get me wrong, you can. Just using a coffee cup is perfectly fine. And I have a coffee mug that I used for years and is, full of layers of dried paint. But the Citadel water pot has a couple things going for it. I'll talk about it in a later video, but check it out for yourself. I've had it for a couple of months now, and I really like it. I really like it. It can help clean your brushes more than just, swishing around in water, and it's got a couple other things going for it. So if you have $10 to spare, think about it. But I'll talk about that later. So don't worry about going overboard with the Nuln Oil wash. It's, you'd almost have to try to do that. All the model needs is just a solid coat all over. The bolt gun, backpack, whole 9 yards. Nuln Oil, all of it. And if you haven't used Nuln Oil before, for heaven's sakes, do yourself a favor. Get yourself a pot of Nuln Oil and give it a try. It's kind of one of those secret weapon paints that pretty much everyone has in their repertoire that, that I'd really wish I'd had when I was first starting. So once you're done with the Nuln Oil, we're going to move on to highlighting here. And I'm using the Mephiston Red on the Cavalry Brown parts. All we're doing is just highlighting the edges. And to do that, we use kind of the lower half of the long edge of the brush. And I know that's kind of a mouthful. So you want to use, again, the long edge of the brush. You don't want to use the point. And you want to use the edge of the brush that's kind of closer to the tip, just because the middle part of the bristles, that's called the belly of the brush, is thicker and it retains more paint. And it's a lot easier to kind of glob on too much if you use that kind of center of the brush edge. But using, closer towards the tip, that gives you a much finer line. So, and remember, we only want the highlights here. We only want to brighten up the places where the light would hit the brightest. And an easy way to tell that is to just look at your model, straight top down. And that will, whatever you can see when you're looking straight top down, that will get a highlight. So now I'm going in with some Evil Sun Scarlet. We're going into the eyes, the lenses. Now, we don't want to paint all over our Mephiston Red. All we want to do is add in a little bit closest to his nose, kind of closer to the center. We're going to do that on both sides of the helmet. And again, you don't want to cover up all of the Mephiston Red. We want to see that that transition from dark to light. And that's how we do almost all of our painting, is we start with darker colors and we build up to lighter colors. There are some exceptions, but that's usually how we do things. Or at least that's usually how I do things. If you have some other way of doing things, then do that. Whatever works for you. This is just how I am doing things. Now I'm taking my AK orange. I apologize. I don't know exactly which color orange this is, because when it came in the mail, it had kind of blorped out a little bit. And it's The part of the label that says exactly which kind of orange it is covered with paint. But all we wanted to do is put a little dot in the far corner of the vision lenses, closest to the Marine's ears. So you can also do this with white, but that might be a little bit much, depending on what you want to do. So now we're taking our Sybarite Green here. Just need a little teeny tiny little bit of it. And if you get too much, you can just daub it on the edge of the pot there. And we're using this to highlight the edges of those mystery armor cables. Okay, moving on to our Ironbreaker. This is going to be a lighter metallic color. I wouldn't go with like a really bright silver or aluminum color. That might be a bit too much. But we're going to do the same thing here that we've been doing on the rest of the model. Just use that edge of the brush to highlight the upper kind of more visible parts on the bolt gun. That would be the magazine, parts of the barrel, upper bit of the chain bayonet, and the shoulder studs, which we are seeing most from above. You don't want to highlight all the shoulder studs, just because some of them are pretty far down, and you wouldn't really see highlights on those without some kind of different light source. So I know it can be a little easy to go a little overboard with your highlighting. So just remember, you can always just do a little bit now, and it's a lot easier to add than to subtract. So adding some highlights on his chest cabling here. And again, we just want to get those upper edges of the cabling. We don't need to do the whole thing. So you don't even need to highlight all of each individual shoulder stud. We just need kind of the highest parts. And for some of the studs, that'll be most of it that gets highlighted. Others, just part. All right, now we are moving on to the edge highlights on the armor plating itself. This is where we use our Mechanicus Standard Gray, our medium gray. And same process, just doing the outer edges of the armor. And again, don't be shy about rotating the model, especially when you're doing the main armor pieces. You want to make sure that it shows, because it can be easy to highlight from just one side. And so, if you turn the model, you may find that you've highlighted kind of one edge, but not on the edge, if that makes any sense. So, you can see the highlight from one angle, but not the other. And you want to make sure that these highlights stand out. These help bring a really nice contrast, and they help the model, they give the model depth. And they help it come alive, make it look like your model is actually out there, that your Space Marines, I don't know, out in the sunlight on some ravaged world fighting for freedom, or because he hates what his brother Space Marines have done, or whatever cause you've got going. So one important thing that nobody told me when I was first starting out, kind of wish they had, is it's really important not to go too long in between brush washes. You want to make sure that you're not painting for more than, a good 30, 40 seconds before you wash your brush off. If the longer you go without washing your brush, the more paint is going to dry in your brush. And the more paint dries in your brush, the quicker it's going to degrade, and, the less efficacious it's going to be. And some brushes are a bit more forgiving than others, but for sure, you don't want any of your brushes to get totally gunked up with paint. It'll be a real pain to wash out, and you'll wish, much like I did, that you would have just taken a little more time to wash your brush here and there, rather than let paint build up over time and then have to spend half an hour using soap to wash a brush. And that's not fun. It takes forever. It's a pain in the butt. Best to just take a few seconds, every few seconds, and give your brush a wash. Trust me, you'll be glad you did. So the backpack can be a little tricky here. It's got a surprising number of edges to it, some of which aren't very big and can be a little tricky to edge highlight with the side of the brush. So just go slow, be patient. Again, don't be shy about rotating the model in your hands. That's part of why you have a base holder to begin with. Okay, now that we are done with our medium gray highlight, we're going to move on to a very top edge highlight using our light gray. I'm using Administratum Grey from Citadel. Again, whatever you have, whatever you prefer using, go ahead and use that. There is absolutely no obligation to use exactly the paints I have used. So, and we don't want to cover up all of our medium gray highlight. That will, again, that'll destroy our gradation here. That'll bring things down, and we want to build up that highlight, just the very top edges of things. So exact same procedure, just a lighter color and less of it. So, and again, if you need to find those extreme highlights, just look at the model straight top down. Whatever you can see, that's what gets the highlight. And there we have it. One completed Mark VI Corvus Space Marine and Dark Angel Legion colors. Don't worry about the base. I haven't forgotten about that. We'll take care of that next time. So thank you for joining me. Again, my name is Nate. This has been the first episode of a 40K journey. Please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed the video, and consider supporting the channel on Patreon. Hope you're having a great day wherever and whenever you are, and I'll see you next time.